This church has a gathering because God is a gathering God. That is, God intends to gather the church and does gather the church, calls out the church into public places to be out there with the gospel for the sake of the world. So it's kind of cool that the ELCA Youth Gathering is one of the most powerful signs of us as church being called out for the sake of the world.
As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way.
It all started in 1895, where a conference held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania led to the birth of the Luther League of America, thereby setting a model for youth conventions and gatherings for over the next 100 years. During the early 20th century, the ancestor bodies to the eventual ELCA had youth groups involved in Luther League, a precursor to today's Lutheran Youth Organization, or some variation thereof. Delegations of students would get together in those early decades to join with each other for worship, the celebration of Christ, and to have fun. Over the years, they would become increasingly crucial on a statewide, regional, and even national level.
They had youth gatherings that were held, I think, every 2 years, and they were, given the times, quite sizable.
In the 1950s and 60s, the Luther League conventions saw their first evolution as they became more of part of an overall gathering than its whole. This also marked the time when leadership was being passed to the high school students from the college students and seminarians. With this, the focus on social issues of the time became a dominant theme within the context of the event.
The world in which we live is a neighborhood, and now we face the moral responsibility of making this world a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools.
There was no other division in our church that would have even had the idea to invite Martin Luther King to come to a convention. The fact that it was done was amazing, and it was done against a lot of resistance.
There were a frequency of gatherings at the time, happening almost every 2 years, until the 70s, when another evolution came to be and the future of what the youth gathering could be was established. In 1976, 3 major Lutheran church bodies, including the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, came together as one, drawing more than 25,000 people to New Orleans.
Kind of a precursor for what would happen 10, 12 years later.
The collaboration did not last, but the gatherings did, and the American Lutheran Church and Lutheran Church of America continued their storied tradition of youth gatherings. In 1981 and 1985, the LCA had their youth gatherings on the campus of Purdue University, offering a smaller number, around 5,000, to enjoy a huge event in a smaller community.
It just seemed natural to be on a college campus. It was more accessible. It was far less expensive because the room and board is far less expensive than being in hotels in the city. So it was very affordable.
The ALC, however, had a steeper tradition, calling on more than 20,000 in their youth gatherings in 1982 and 1985, where in Denver, Colorado, they were able to bring Jimmy Carter in for the keynote message. 1988 was the biggest milestone as the ALC and LCA and AELC all merged to become the ELCA. This was the biggest evolution of all, and it spilled over into the youth gatherings, as that summer in San Antonio, they saw the biggest numbers since New Orleans in 1976. This gathering became the model for all national gatherings from then on.
At one level, it's just really thrilling particularly if you're a young person or a teenager, and particularly if you come from a part of the country where there are not lots of Lutherans, to see that many Lutherans who share your faith, that's just a pretty exciting thing. And I think that's something that kids just don't forget.
Into the 90s, under the leadership of Daryl Koenig, the gathering saw numerous advances while keeping the general format of the gatherings that came before it.
One of the things that began to happen was, I would say, a greater openness to, a variety of experiences in, say, the mass experience
experiences, but there was a greater sense of integration that happened between all of the elements that make up a gathering.
One of the major additions to the national gathering were the events that began to precede it, such as the Multicultural Youth Leadership Event and the Definitely Abled Youth Leadership Event, or Mile and Dale.
And I think that the fact that we do those two pre-events is just an indication of the church's continuing both sensitivity to and commitment to becoming increasingly diverse.
The gatherings took on a different flavor as a result of that. And issues that were very important in the lives of people were able to be addressed in that kind of a setting.
But with such success of these national gatherings, there are always shortcomings. And once again, the gathering came to New Orleans, this time in 1997. And those shortcomings came in the form of having to limit the number of people coming in as the registration hit an all-time high, and the ability to have and house that many people became too much to handle.
But in the 97 event, the registration included hotel room. So it was really hard to incorporate a new cost base that would have impacted probably, I suspect, negatively in terms of, even though we would have had registrations, it would cost more dollars to make those registrations available.
So after the lesson learned in New Orleans, another evolution was to come, and that was to make the format be 2 weeks to accommodate everyone, but also, more importantly, finding a city to be able to handle this many people in that period of time.
The church should not be turning anyone away, and so we need to figure out how to make this opportunity available to everyone who wants to come. I always believe when we go to a city that there's a reason we go, the reason why that particular city has been chosen.
So as that obstacle was overcome in finding the right cities to house this massive event, the switch to theme, as the needs of knowing the world and most important your neighbor were very crucial, especially in the wake of all that had happened so early on in this decade.
Look out, world. There are 40,000 Lutheran youth and adult who are filled and on fire with the Holy Spirit, who are journeying with Jesus, who are going to confront the borders of the world, and they're going to cross those borders and they're going to speak the truth.
But another evolution was to happen. Once again returning to New Orleans, there was an option for another change, this time going back to the 1 week format.
I think the ways that the ELCA Youth Gathering is being invited to be present in New Orleans is something that God has prepared us for.
A gathering is, for most people, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
And what I find energizing for our young people is that we're creating and making disciples, and we're all growing as disciples of Jesus Christ.
When you ask the question, where do I see spiritual growth in the event, it's in this sense of openness to being led by how it is we notice God.
And I think everyone, particularly young people, enjoy a good celebration. This is a 3-year celebration, not just of being young, but it's a celebration of church, of being church together.
This church has a gathering because God is a gathering God. That is, God intends to gather the church and does gather the church, calls out the church into public places to be out there with the gospel for the sake of the world. So it's kind of cool that the ELCA Youth Gathering is one of the most powerful signs of us as church being called out for the sake of the world.
Oh, brothers, let's go down, let's go down, come on down. Come on, brothers, let's go down, down to the river to pray. As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear a starry crown, good Lord, show me the way.